many as we can. And also just a quick announcement, coming up in August, there will be another webinar on social media. So pay attention to the channels and you'll get that announcement, and we'd love to have you on that one. I'm your moderator today, Mark Jenson. I'm a lecturer here at the Hubbard School, and happy to introduce three esteemed professionals who come from a variety of places. The first one is Nitin Dua. Nitin is a senior strategist from Fallon. He had also worked, he's in New York right now with the Fallon agency. He worked here in Minneapolis before that. He has worked on brands like Arby's and Cooper Tire and Facebook News and H&R Block and KeyBank. He is also one of our diversity adjunct fellows. So he helps teach in my account planning class. So welcome, Nitin. And Stacy Janicki, she is our director of account management, senior partner at Carmichael Lynch. Stacy has worked at several agencies in the Twin Cities, Campbell Methune, Cullen McVoy, and Martin Williams. And she's worked on a lot of brands like Caribou, Hellsberg Diamonds, Conago, Jack Links, lots and lots of great brand experience, really smart strategic thinker. So I'm glad to have Stacy here today also. And finally, Andy Thieman. Andy is the Executive Creative Director at Weber Shandwick here in Minneapolis. Andy has a very interesting past, a lot of time spent on client side and a lot of time spent on agency side. So he brings a little different perspective as a creative person from that area. He's worked at Best Buy, he's worked at Target, at JCPenney, and General Mills here in town. He's worked at agencies like Cullen McVoy, Martin Williams, and Yamamoto. So all three of our panelists have a lot of expertise on branding, and that's why they're here today, to talk about branding in 2020. And we've certainly had a challenging year. As we all know, it's kind of been like a trifecta of things that have happened. We had COVID happen in March and continues to happen. We had the murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, the movement that has really caught steam this summer. And we have an election coming up. So lots and lots of things going on. All these things are impacting brands and the communication that brands have to make. So that's why we're talking to our experts today, is to get some perspective on how agencies are counseling brands during this tumultuous time. So I am gonna start the questions off, and we will start with Nitin. We will ask you, Nitin, first. You will start off. So today's brands are being asked to communicate their opinions about issues in the world. What have you at Fallon and your team been advising your brands to communicate since mid-March, both from a content perspective and also a tone perspective?
I guess that question depends on what type of, what they want to say and what they want to accomplish. It's really been challenging when you combine the fact that when COVID started, A, every brand wanted to talk about it, and B, quite frankly, all of them were saying the same thing, which maybe there's something good in that, because you felt like there was someone with you, experiencing this, you belonged in something bigger. But there hit a point, especially recently, where I think everyone's just kind of exhausted. No matter what side you're on, you're exhausted of everything that's going on. And when brands are going to speak to the world today, they have to acknowledge the fact that, A, we don't want to just hear about COVID over and over, because we hear about it all the time. We're exhausted about hearing about it. It's not uplifting, it's scary, it's a lot of negative rather than positive. So I think there's a little bit of advising people to at least consciously and thoughtfully be positive in this world, but then layering in my opinion, a more important thing, which is what Black Lives Matter has done and what the murder of George Floyd sparked right now. And even, if you're watching, I hope people get a chance to watch the eulogy that President Obama did for John Lewis yesterday. I mean, there's so much going on with finding ways to create equity and equality with all different types of people. And if you want to speak, no matter what you say, has to just at least be conscious that that is going on. We have a client that, I'm not going to get into specifics, but they specifically do want to address a topic in American history, and that is loaded right now. And you have to do that carefully. And quite frankly, I think you have to take a side. And we're asking our clients to take what we believe is the right side. the side that is, yes, everyone deserves equality. And I can't believe that that has to be something that even just that idea has to be fought for. So, there's a lot of things I could say because there's so much going on right now in the world. But to me, the most important thing is there's got to be a level of positivity in the COVID context, but B, a level of progress that needs to be made on the diversity, equity, inclusion, and really just equality side of things.
Okay, no, great. Thank you, Nitin. Stacy, your thoughts?
The first thing I'm just going to say is, like, if Dr. Fauci can't predict what's happening, certainly an account executive sitting in her office in White Bear Lake, Minnesota cannot. So we've tried to tell our clients that this is, to use the word unprecedented, in that we have no idea what's happening next. Some people have kind of dubbed this the Coronacoaster, and then you throw in racial inequality and an election on top of that. But I will say what we've told our clients is, I think part of the reason you've seen the tropes and the ads that all mirror one another is because it's just that brands have been looking in a mirror and trying to mirror back what they see in the world, which is great. That's part of what we do as advertisers, is we look for the cultural moments and the touch points that we can then react and respond to as brands. But the other side of that actually differentiates brands is, how do you bring what's inherent in your brand and your DNA and combine that with what's happening in the world, such that the work that you're bringing forth and the ideas and the communication, the relationships you're building are reflecting that unique point of view. And I think the brands that have done it well early on, to me, it's like brands like Nike, Buffalo Wild Wings, that took what was inherent in their DNA and came back in response with messaging, whether it was coronavirus or kind of George Floyd and racial inequality, and kind of were able to make that moment theirs. And it's still happening, with the return of live sports last night and yesterday. Nike broke their new spot, and it's been all over. And people are looking for hopeful, optimistic messages that still address what's happening in the world, but through the lens of, why is that brand bringing me that message in that way?
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Stacy. Andy, your thoughts?
Oh, you guys, you said it all, but I agree. And Stacy, what you said about the combination, it's the first time in maybe ever that every brand is thinking about one thing. They want to sell their whatever they sell, but they need to address and acknowledge the world, and they're all going to do that differently. So how we're counseling our clients, I mean, the thing is, it's unique to every client. They all need to do something, but they're all going to do it in their own way. And it's going to be, like you said, Stacy, that combination of what the brand essence is, their truth, their whatever is endemic to their brand, but also what the world is pushing onto that brand and what that brand now means in this new world.
Andy, I'll direct this one at you first. Stacy just mentioned the Nike commercial, and if you haven't seen that, try to find it. It is an incredible piece of editing, very powerful messaging in there. But what are some other brands that you have noticed, Andy, over the past 4.5 months that have kind of done a really good job? Stacy had mentioned Buffalo Wild Wings, Nike. What other brands have you noticed?
Well, let's talk about that Nike spot for a second. That broke last night, and it's like it's already gone viral everywhere, including LinkedIn, which is where I think I acknowledged it. And just the first thing that hit me, other than the message is great and it is amazing, is that, like, we're all a lot of us are trapped sort of in a existing footage, a lot of montages, a lot of big music and a strong VO. And that's really nobody wants just that. So and leave it to Wyden, of course, to come up with an amazing way to do it totally different. But they did an amazing job, and that's really hard to do. So there is an argument right now for creativity flourishes when it's got some boundaries. It's why we have strategists. It's why there are creative briefs. But some of these boundaries right now are the tightest little boxes we've ever been in creatively, at least for production. And to think about not just what would be an amazing idea, but what's something we can pull off right now without being able to go on set, without being able to do the normal casting and everything that we normally do is a feat in and of itself. So, but then on the other side of the coin, there's, so much of it has been quick or reactionary, or that's why you're seeing so much in social right now. It's easier to make perhaps, quickly. and a lot of, all the way down to the CEO letter, like I can't say that I've seen an amazing CEO letter yet, but we all got one from all the brands that we're subscribed to. And it's like what I've found is interesting is just their need to communicate quickly, which sometimes cuts out the opportunity to do something grand and amazing. So I don't have a litany of amazing examples. Honestly, there have been things that have come out that have struck me, but there's a lot of the sad montage right now. And by sad, I mean just sort of like underwhelming. But that Nike spot really did nail it. It's like the spot of the day. I realize that, but it's a good example.
Yeah, absolutely. Well done. Stacy, but what about you? Some brands that besides the ones you've mentioned, if there's any other brands that have kind of caught your attention, and maybe it wasn't necessarily a good piece of communication, but it just kind of caught your attention.
Yeah, it's interesting. Since it's Wyden Kennedy Appreciation Day, I would say like on the bottom of every brief, they say, Susan Kaufman, who's an ECD there, always says like, don't make an ad. And of course they made an ad, but they made an ad that transcended. But the one thing that's been struck me in the last couple of months is we used to compete against agencies for making content. And it's dawned on me now, my competition aren't the people I'm looking at on the screen right here. It's the 14-year-old that's making TikToks in his parents' basement, honestly. And it used to be about brand recall, and now it's about engagement. And so when I think about the brands that have really stood out, I look at outside of making ads and messaging, what are they doing that's transformative with their business? So a couple examples most recently that I think have been interesting. Panera introduced earlier this spring a coffee subscription model. They decided to look outside of the casual dining category, which is not doing well right now, and looked at Netflix and their business model. And it's forcing people to get out of their houses to go get coffee, which was this habitual behavior that now has been changed because you used to stop at Starbucks and now you can brew your own cup. The other one this week that really struck me as interesting, we'll see how people respond to it, is Emirates, which is an airline industry. They just introduced a coronavirus insurance to try to get people back flying with them again. There's no cost to flyers, but basically they're saying if you contract the coronavirus within 31 days of flying with us, not even if that contact tracing ties back to your ride on that airplane, they're covering up to $200,000 in medical costs. They're covering your salary during quarantine, and they're covering up to $2,000 of funeral allowance. That's mind blowing to me. I'm not sure what their insurance rider is on that, but like, I'm interested how brands are changing their business models and adjusting, not just from a messaging standpoint, but from a service model, product model standpoint. So those kind of stand out for me a little bit.
Yeah, that's terrific. I had not heard of the airline example, and that is really pushing it out there. So thanks for sharing that. Nitin, how about you? What, from your perch in Brooklyn, what are things you've been noticing?
Well, I love those examples. It's the examples where people don't just say, yes, COVID is happening. Or yes, we're re-talking about, there's a new civil rights movement. It's what are the consequences of that, and how can I add value to people? As little or as big as it is. Something like the insurance example, the Emirates example, that's a bigger example. But even something as, I saw something, I think today, and it made me laugh, but Bumble partnered with Babe, the like wine in a can, and they are giving away essentially moving services in a moving truck to people who have broken up during COVID but had to stay together because it's hard to, because of COVID, it's hard to move and find an apartment. And so they're giving that away to people. So, I mean, that's a little that's something that's going to be a blip. It's going to capture a little bit of news. It's going to be fun. It might get them some short-term sales. And it's a fun brand thing, and it's a partnership. They did a lot with that. And it's not going to be the most meaningful and impactful, but it's something that acknowledges the change and honestly the emotions that people have gone through because of it. And they found a way to be unique to themselves and also, frankly, provide a service, which I think is wonderful.
And yeah, that made me think of something. Remember, like on the whatever day it was when all of Instagram was like blacked out, right? But then there's like a Gap swim shorts ad halfway through. It's like, I mean, you have to be super careful. I mean, the media buys right now too are like, you have to be very, very careful about where you're putting things and when you're putting things. Because if you're the only ad in the mid in a sea of like a movement that's happening, that's not a good place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Stacy, I'll start with you on this round robin question. Certainly, the impact of Black Lives Matters, the murder of George Floyd, had a great impact on brands. And there's some brands that had to make some announcements at the end of June, July, in terms of changing who they were. Brands like Aunt Jemima, Eskimo Pie, Mrs. Butterworth, things like that. How do you see advertising and brand kind of moving forward in this environment of what's going on right now?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm sure all the panelists would agree with me in saying we've all been taking a really close look at ourselves and our organizations. I think historically agencies pride themselves in being progressive. And certainly we are from an ideological standpoint in terms of the people that make up our companies and our agencies. I think we have a twofold responsibility, both as agencies and as our clients as marketers. I think there's not a company in this country right now that's not re-examining their own DE&I initiatives in terms of how they get diversity within their workforce, how they kind of embed that within their culture. And obviously as agencies, we're doing that. We're trying to be transparent as part of the 600 and Rising call to action. But I think the other responsibility we have that maybe other industries don't is that we put out work and messaging that influences pop culture that we're responsible for. And to a certain extent, those conversations have always, as it pertains to race, have had to do with casting. And I think we're having to ask a bigger question about how the work we do tells stories and it is true to the experiences people outside of kind of what I would call the largely kind of white makeup of what agencies represent. You can't tell those stories. You can't begin to understand what those experiences are unless you have a workforce that represents the diversity of the stories you're trying to tell. And it's going to be hard to do, but I think what I love is that I think people are raising their hands by publishing their numbers, agencies kind of makeups, and we're holding ourselves accountable through our performance reviews. I know at Carmichael Lynch, we just finished our annual performance cycle. Everyone had to put a DE&I goal into their performance goals that'll be measured against next year. And performance and honestly kind of salary compensation will be tied to that. So I think it's been the push we need, and I just hope the momentum continues.
That's great. Thank you, Stacy. Andy, your thoughts on terms of how do we make advertising and branding less racist than it has been?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's a huge question and it's a massive issue. The panel's pretty good. I feel like I stand out in a way right now, and I feel it. And yeah, right. And I read something recently. It's like, even if you hire, a few, all Black creative teams and like swap like the color of your agency shifts, basically, if the people at the top approving everything and giving all the feedback are just white guys like me, how can you possibly, it gets washed out somehow. There's something it can't keep the momentum going of where those ideas came from. It's going to get, I don't know, not tainted, but changed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it starts with like initiatives like the Brand Lab here in Minneapolis, right? Like starting kids young, getting them introduced to the industry early on to get them in early. Because what we can't do, and we should make a pact here on this call, like we can't poach from each other, because then you're just like, smearing around the same ratio. Like we need a new influx of talent. And how exactly, the only thing I can think of that is like the strongest way to do that is to get kids in right as soon as they're popping out of school and raise them up into leadership positions.
Yeah.
So it will, the thing is that takes forever. So I don't know. Does anybody have any brilliant ideas how to speed that up?
No, but I will say, we've made some recent hires where we've relaxed what our job requirements would be. You don't have to have 10 years of working at an ad agency. Let's look at adjacent categories and marketing backgrounds, because let's be honest with ourselves. This isn't rocket science. So I think too far we've been too prescriptive about what that experience has to be to deem yourself kind of eligible for a job at an agency.
Yeah, no, great points. Nitin, like you to weigh in?
Yeah, what I like about the comments that I've heard from Stacy and Andy is that we're reevaluating from within, and I hope we're reevaluating everything. It's hiring, it's what we make, it's who's on camera, and even who's making it off camera. I think it's, I heard this joke from, I think it was Trevor Noah on The Daily Show, and he was talking about, I'm from DC, so this hit me personally. He was talking about the Washington Redskins, and it's almost like everyone is saying, yes, we need to end systemic racism. And let's change a football team name. Yes, that's important, and that's something we need to do, but it's not the thing that's going to end a systemic problems that exist in our country and for agency people in our agencies. Like Andy said, I don't see people who look like me at the top, and for Black individuals, it's even worse. Throughout casting and throughout editing and throughout production, all of that process, I don't see a lot of people who look like myself, and for Black individuals, it's even worse. So I'm glad we're reevaluating all of what we do, and it starts with everyone. It starts from briefs, it starts from clients, and it starts from all of us holding everybody accountable for the decisions and the actions that we make. But it's also about having important and intimate conversations, because like Andy mentioned, there's no solution right now. Like there's no silver bullet, none of that exists. But I think what's extremely important, and we found success with this a little bit at Fallon, which is if the leadership team, who is mostly white, listens to the people of color and gives them room as junior individuals to be able to tell a CEO, hey, this is how I feel, and I hope you acknowledge that. And I hope you understand that this is not just some BS feeling I have. I'm one of 20 people of color who feel this way, or 10 or 5 or 4 or 0, and everyone is listening to each other, talking, acknowledging. I think that's the most important, because what happens is, and it's true of a strategy, if you write a strategic brief and you just rush through it and you didn't talk to people, do your due diligence, do your research, you're gonna have a bad creative brief. It's just gonna happen. But if you talk to people, listen, ask really good questions that are really thoughtful, you're going to be able to understand and really empathize with the people of color and the problems that they've been going through at ad agencies. And instead of them moving on to a different one because, yeah, you tried diversity, they came in and they didn't feel like the environment was inclusive for them, they're going to go, oh, this fire environment is starting to become more inclusive of my opinion and who I am. And then they're going to recommend their friends who they've been telling, don't come into advertising, man. It's not for people like us. They're going to start going, hey, you're really good at design and you've been doing something outside advertising. I think it's time for you to come in, because now they're starting to listen to people like you and me and accept people like you and me. So it's a lot of things. And I think, inclusion is important, diversity is important, all of it is. And they almost sort of feed off themselves, and there's a chicken and egg. Are you inclusive first? Or you're all of it. You have to do all of it at this point. And you have to really just think about every single layer. I'm rethinking my own briefs and trying to acknowledge my own biases. So I'm not catering to an audience that is very exclusive. So that's I was rambling a little bit, but these are conversations and I think feelings and thoughts that a lot of people of color have had that are deciding to leave agencies because it's never worked for them.
And it seems like the time right now is the conversations are actually happening, that they probably didn't happen 5 years ago, even 2 years ago. So I think that's what is coming out of this, is what you're talking about, is that all the agencies that you're working with are starting to talk about that. So that's terrific. As a reminder to people listening in, watching, if you have any questions, use the chat. We will try to get to them, so throw them in there. Nitin, I'm going to start with you. As you're drinking, I will give you a little bit of time to catch up. But just to kind of follow up on that, Cindy Gallup, certainly a person in our industry that is iconic in terms of the causes that she fights for, has made a statement. She's a great believer that adversity drives opportunity. What are your thoughts on that,
Nitin? First, I don't know a lot about Cindy Gallup, which is a fault of my own, but what I do understand is that she's really good at calling people out on things that people at my level, mid, and even people more junior than me are afraid to. So it's almost like it's nice to have even one representative at that level who's ready to have those tough conversations. And I think adversity has always been a chance for opportunity in any industry, any whatever. I mean, I'm sure all of us on this panel have done it, where we're finding articles about like, how do clients advertise in a recession, and how does advertising, how those who have invested in advertising during the last recession were actually significantly more successful coming out of it. We've all done it, and I'm sure clients have been like, well, you're the ad agency, so of course you make money this way. But you're like, no, that like someone else proved it, not just us. And it's true in the advertising regard, but it's also true in this world of diversity, equity, inclusion, because it's unfortunate how this new civil rights movement was sparked. But what has happened is it was sparked. So now we better do something about it.
Okay. Andy, your thoughts on how adversity drives opportunity in our business?
Think about the recession at 2009, 10. I mean, can you imagine in 2007 suggesting that you're going to change the way taxis work? People will be like, what's wrong with taxis? Taxis are fine, and then all of a sudden, out of all that and so many other things, it's Uber and it's everything else that came out of whatever that mystical stuff was in the ether, back then, that was, people started inventing things. And I don't know that it was because of a recession, but maybe, I don't know where Uber came from. I always imagine it being some, Google executive who was laid off and had a great idea and pitched it and they never bought it. And then he finally got it made, or however it all worked. But I mean, you think about that, like that, it creates something in all of us. I mean, I can only imagine what will pop up in these next year or two, like the things that will be invented and the way we are. And I mean, so there's this big conversation going on right now too about how, will some of the things we've changed recently, will they stick? Like as far as shopping, let's just talk about Costco for a second, right? Like you can't go in there under 60 or 65 before 10 a.m. It's for seniors, and you can't, like, they won't let me in to go shopping before then. Same with a lot of grocery stores. And that's, it's so they can get in and out and just be on their way and not have to be around so many people and all, and I get it. But why wouldn't we just keep that? It seems like a really nice thing for them to be able to have. It's a good benefit. So like that's just a little thing, but there's so many things that we're probably inventing right now, ways we're behaving, that are going, there's the mask, that are going to change the way we operate in the future. And then speaking of masks, I mean, like if you've traveled to Asia, you see, like I've seen masks all over airports over there. And I always wondered, like, is that for me? Is that for them? Like, what's going on? I mean, they're sick or they're worried about getting sick. You understand generally what the mask is about. But I remember thinking, like, I mean, I've been sick on airplanes before and never wore a mask just because you don't, but now you do. And we will see that everywhere now. Masks will be a thing. And it's not weird anymore. And I think that was part of it, was just like, why is that person wearing a mask? What's going on? Are they like sick, or do they just have a cold, or what's going on? And now it's just, I mean, we're going to see masks at every time we go to the airport, way more than we ever have in the past. I'm hogging the airtime. Stacy, what do you want to say? I can see you're smiling.
No, I'm laughing because it's true. And I'm also looking at Nitin with his mask on. So it's almost like you guys coordinated that effort.
That's like a serious beak one too. Look at that thing.
Just going back to the OG plague. That's all.
I think Cindy's onto something. I've been doing this long enough, as everyone else on this panel, that we've heard, the tale of advertising's demise is greatly exaggerated. It was first going to be testing, and then the internet, and then, TiVo came out. And, at every point, it's actually made the industry stronger as we've looked and kind of pivoted to figure out what do we do to offset that. But I think it's for brands too. The brands I'm admiring right now are like, take Clorox, who makes, their wipes, their antibacterial wipes. Their sales are up 500%, and they've yet to cut any spending because their CMO sees that this is a time to build relationships. Salient's during right now, like if your sales are up because you're a canned food product, Bush's is one of our clients, Bush's Beans, their sales are up 150% as consumers were pantry loading during those first months of COVID. And then, last week or 2 weeks ago, Ivanka and Donald Trump decided to be spokespeople of Goya beans. like there's opportunities there to take advantage of that aren't going to be there forever. And so there's an opportunity to build salience. And now's the time. I mean, you hear about, I'm concerned with marketers that are looking to cut budgets. Obviously that impacts our business. Now's when you should be leaning in and building those relationships and defining, the stage you're setting for coming out of this about what you are as a brand and how you help consumers. So there's a huge opportunity in that. I mean, Clorox could ride this all out and just let the cash register ring, but they're not. They're partnering with Nextdoor app on kind of ways to build relationships with neighbors and how to share extra Clorox wipes. And those are the brands that are going to come out of this the better for it, that are actually leaning in instead of trying to kind of play it safe.
Yeah, that's a great point, Stacy. You talked about budgets. I just read today, Kraft Heinz and Kellogg's are announcing that they are boosting their marketing media spending by 40% through the back half of 2020. So what types of things like that, Stacy, are you talking to your clients about?
I mean, it's just that, Mark. It's leaning in. I think Andy made a good point. There's a lot of statistical research that says when change has happened for long enough, it becomes that those habits become part of just routine. So like we have brands, like I said, CPG brands like Bush's, where we're trying to advise on strategies of let's just assume that a certain portion of people now will always do their grocery shopping online. What does that mean from a messaging standpoint? What does that mean from a marketing standpoint? Conversely, Helzberg Diamonds, which is one of our clients as well, this year they hit their 5-year goal for e-commerce as people are buying rings online. You're talking about $10,000 pieces of jewelry that we thought no one's ever going to buy that type of a product over the internet. Guess what? They are. So I think we've got to change. Not only do we have to kind of keep the gas on the fire in terms of spending and talking to consumers, but just think about how our messaging has to change because of how consumer behavior is going to change, not temporarily, but for the unforeseen future, for sure.
Yeah. Nitin, how about you? How are you counseling clients on spending, budgeting as you're looking at the rest of this year and even into 2021?
I mean, we'd love for them to spend as much as possible. Honestly, before even getting to counseling, the places where it seems the budget is going up is on brand strategy. A lot of our clients want to take the budgets that they may have had set for something else and say, you know what, we can actually think a little bit more long-term now. How do we think about then how we build our brand over the long term, how we think about now, and how we think about, next year and even the year after that? How can we build how can we rethink our foundation, make it significantly stronger right now, and build for the future? But on top of that, I mean, you can use at least advertising and messaging in so many ways. I love the Clorox example. What they're doing is saying, we're not just trying to make the cash register ring. At this point, we need to help, and it's our obligation or opportunity. And I'm sure I've seen a couple of studies that have shown that people are now turning more and more to brands to really maybe do the function of an ideal government. And so if that's the case, maybe your advertising and marketing budget isn't just to sell what you're supposed to sell, it's to help people belong or do something a little bit more self-actualizing, or go very back to the very bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, because survival is something that's even more necessary now than it's ever been before. And if you're Clorox, maybe you are at the bottom of that, and you can use that budget to message and say, don't fear anymore. Don't fear that this thing is going to come and bite you. We're going to figure out a way to do it. So I think there's a lot of different ways that you can take it, but we talked about adversity and opportunity, and I think cutting it all might be some, at worst case, admitting defeat, or maybe at best case, just flying by.
Okay, great. Thank you. Andy, your thoughts on that whole area?
Oh yeah, I'm not influencing budgets like I wish I was, but we have a lot of healthcare clients, and they've had no problem spending money, and that is obvious. They're in the middle of it, and but on the strategy point, Nitin, I wonder if a lot of that, a refocus on strategy and thinking thoughtfully about what your brand means and how it should behave, is a luxury of this pause. Like there was a time, like normally there's just this frantic making, you're probably writing briefs, I can only imagine, on Arby's and whatever. You're constantly selling a new sandwich or whatever. But for a little bit there, you couldn't go there, you know, and I bet that I can imagine there was a whole lot of thinking about the meats and other things that, and other brands too, that they finally had a moment to think about, like, how do we want to be here? You know, like we can be strategic and super thoughtful, where normally we're just like on to the next. And it's this constant cycle of just driving traffic and getting people to go to stores or whatever it is. And then just the comments about CPG and like Kellogg's and other brands doubling down. And I mean, it's amazing. When I was at General Mills, it was like, let's try to convince people that it's not as bad as they think it is, and Yoplay's okay, and sugar's all right if it's every once in a while on cereal. And now, I mean, it is like, it's comfort food, and it's just, and it's easy to get, and it lasts a long time. And suddenly it's like way back on trend. Now we'll probably have a crazy epidemic of diabetes after all this, but there is an interesting shift in behavior that was like really worried about that stuff. And now it's like, well, I mean, we need beans, or we need cereal, or we need whatever it is because it lasts a long time. And it's easy to grab, and you don't have to worry about it. It's comforting.
Yeah, no, that's great. Question from Emily, who is listening in today. Hi, she's talking about the pre-COVID user experience was certainly, and Andy, I'll direct it at you. User experience was certainly on the rise in pre-COVID and played a part in a lot of many brand activations. How do you think this is going to change given the current situation that we're in as shoppers go more digital?
Yeah, well, I mean, it will shift more digital. And I mean, our event business is, I mean, a big chunk of PR's job, and what Weber Shandwick does is like, we throw big parties and create hype and get people together and get everybody excited and make sure everyone's there, you know, in person at the thing. And you can't do that right now. So it is shifting more digital. But I don't know how it will. And that's the thing. So much of this is like, what will it be like? It's like, we have some predictions or whatever, but we don't know. Everything changes so quickly. I mean, we don't even know when our kids are going back to school, or if they are, you know, and that's like in a few weeks. So how people will go to some big convention in Las Vegas in March, I don't know. I bet it'll happen, but it's going to be weird, and there won't be as many people on purpose. Just the idea of space and you know, everybody wearing a mask and all. I mean, it's going to change the way we participate in brand activations and how we shop in general. And I suspect it will shift more digital.
And Nitin, your thoughts on that? And just everybody, Nitin has some repair people coming into his home, so that's why he has the mask on.
Yeah, I mean, I think with user experience, I'm hoping that a lot of brands start to reevaluate how digitally they show up in the world. We have a banking client. We want mobile banking to be even easier, even better, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's from a product and service level all the way to an advertising and engagement level. I think all of it will be rethought out. And, you know, I've gone to a grocery store where all the arrows point one way and tell you to go one way, and people aren't following that. So, I mean, like, we have to really think about what's happening and how people are going to behave, and psychologically even what people want, and design things in a way that's going to be beneficial for everybody and add value to their lives based on how they're behaving and what they want, and what's safe, quite frankly.
Stacy, any additional thoughts there?
I mean, not a lot. I mean, I think the one area we have seen budgets cut with our current clients is activations, because a lot of that relied on in-person events. I think eventually the long game is that's going to return because it's just part of our culture to go to concerts and sporting events. And when that comes back, it's just a great way to kind of interact with people on a one-on-one basis. But I think that's some of where the greatest work in our industry has been in the last couple of years. So maybe I'm being too optimistic here. I don't think we're going to be, you know, quarantining ourselves indefinitely. I think long game is we're going to kind of return to using that as a touch point to talk to consumers for sure.
Great. Stacy, a question from the audience for you. You had mentioned agencies competing against teens on TikTok. You have a couple of teenagers at home, so you're well aware of that. Mm-hmm. How should brands start to tap into the Gen Z, the activation superpower on social media platforms? How should brands tap into that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think too often agencies think we have to have the answers, and there's this competitive thing that we know how to do it better than others. there's a part of me that says maybe we should rethink that. And I think we've started to by engaging more with influencers. And honestly, like, I don't even know how you would define an influencer, but in my mind, those are influencers. If you're 12 and you've got 20,000 people following you on TikTok, you're an influencer. Let's treat them as if they're celebrities we're trying to, back in the old days, get as a VO and a TV spot. And how do we partner with them? How do we identify them? And I think we just need to be looking, even when we're writing briefs, again, it gets back to this notion of we're not making an ad. How do we think of other ways to reach out to people? Where TikTok is interesting to me is how does that become a media channel that you can actually support and drive, especially knowing that there's based on data being compromised, and there's been that whole conversation about TikTok specifically as a platform. But I kind of lump it into social media in general, and just being mindful how we activate in those spaces too.
Great. Nitin, a question from the audience for you. How have you been having alliances with voices during this time without adding to the noise? Because clearly there's a lot of noise there. So what do you think's the right thing to do from that perspective?
I mean, that's just true of advertising. I mean, most people think it's noise. Most people don't want to hear what you have to say, and they believe it's a necessary evil for being entertained in this world. So yeah, I mean, breaking through the noise is what I believe good agencies do best. So however you do it, whether it's allying with influencers who are 12 years old and clearly make better content than you ever will on TikTok, or it's finding ways to be really clever and interesting and smart with media, and using that to its advantage, or it's making just great creative that is the one spot that people actually are like, wait, that was a good commercial. I mean, because that's probably the best reaction you're going to get from a normal person that's not an advertising nerd like probably most of us are. So, I think it's just been true overall. If the question on allying with voices is about finding people who are good partners for your brand, I mean, I think that's going to be, it sort of depends a lot on what your goals are, where you want to be. I mean, on TikTok is such a unique platform. You have to be able to know how it works very deeply, because, for example, they do something different where you click on the music, the background music, in order to explore. That's something no other platform does. So how do you use something like that in order to be able to, for lack of a better term, hack it?
Yeah. Andy, I'll direct this question to you. Andy was one of the first guest speakers that I had in one of my classes when this all started to happen back in mid-March. And Andy, talked about getting jobs. And I think a question from Dr. Cohen of our school is, any advice, given that the job market is just not strong right now. Internship placements are not there. You're not getting the experiences that they have. If you're a graduating student, whether it was this May or next May, what are some of the things that you'd want to know now that you maybe didn't know at that time?
Like, how should kids get jobs? Is that essentially what we're talking about? I mean, it is hard right now because there aren't a lot of jobs to be had. I mean, the job boards are empty, and they're starting to slowly creep back. My wife is a recruiter. I feel it intensely, like in our house, even that just like she's quiet. Like there isn't a lot going on out in the world right now as far as hiring goes. But I do think, I don't know, I want to imagine that especially with this, like everything we're talking about, TikTok and influencers, and there's a certain amount of youth and I don't know, I'd like to think optimism that could come from a new wave of younger talent that can teach us old farts the ways of, how does it all work? What is real? What is good? What is authentic? I have huge opinions on what is good, bad, or otherwise, standing at a board assessing ideas and picking the good one. But there are things like TikTok, for instance, like I'm not an expert, and we need more of that and a bigger influx. That's not answering your question. I don't know how. I don't know. I mean, there just because there's a lack of everything. I mean, I would be thinking real hard about going to grad school right now and thinking about going to portfolio school, if you're creative, if you weren't sure and you were going to try and break in, and just like I didn't go to an ad school and I lucked out and I wrote price tags for Best Buy for the first 3 years of my career. I like earned it. But if I didn't have that opportunity, I was all set to go to portfolio school. And man, now that's what I would do for sure, is like build your book, think long and hard about how you want to be and where you want to work. I think the true colors of these agencies are coming out right now. And I'm not talking about the statistics and ratios and whatever. I'm talking about it's becoming very clear how an agency is. Everyone's exposed. We used to kind of hide behind just like, look at the cool things we made. And now it's like way more about the people who work in those agencies. And so think about that before just like the effort in marketing seems to be shifting towards strategy, try to adjust your thinking from, and I know you want to make money and get a job, students, but like think long and hard about where you want to work and why you want to work there before you're just falling all over yourself to just get any job you can, which like was sort of the strategy until now.
Stacy, any thoughts on that?
I mean, I still think it kind of goes back to networking. And there's this moment of time where like that first phase of your career is really about kind of establishing those contacts with people. I think what I will say is everyone in our industry we've all been in that position, like Andy said, trying to crack into the industry. And because of that, I think we're all willing to take a call, or if someone introduces us to someone, to do a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting, take advantage of downtime to make those connections, because when the market starts opening up, you actually have some foundational connections that you can go call back on. So you're not just, one of 500 people applying for the one job that gets posted. I will say agencies need to hold themselves as accountable into their long-term growth, as we talk about the Cloroxes of the world, not pulling back on spending. Our internship has long been the pipeline of our talent and the strength of our middle management at the agency. And we kept some of those positions this summer because it would be in effect like the Twins saying we're not playing a full season, so we're just going to cancel our farm system. There's a long-term impact on that goes beyond just not having junior staff for the next 3 months.
Yep.
I think agencies have to think about that.
Nitin, any thoughts from your perspective?
The networking thing I think is extremely important because, and it's funny, I signed up for like all of the things where I thought I could do my best to help people. Like I know, I think Natalie Kim is her name. She had one called Coffee at a Distance, something like that. And I expected my inbox to be flooded, and I thought it would be out of control and I wouldn't have time to meet with everyone. And it wasn't. It was like kind of easy, to be frank. And so, I remember being a college student and being worried that I'm asking too much of someone in the position that they're in, or I'm brown nosing them by networking. It's none of those things. You're developing relationships that are super important. But there are also people, and I know part of the question was about students of color, and that tends to correlate to people who actually need the money or need a job now. Typically part of being a person of color in this industry, and the internship being the pipeline, it's true for all agencies, the internship is, but a lot of people of color can't afford that. I was fortunate to be able to afford portfolio school and have that opportunity. And I was 26, left a great paying job to be able to do an internship at Fallon, right? But I'm lucky, and I know that. And I think part of what you can do now too is look beyond advertising in things that are tangential but growing. I know some businesses, like I've heard 3M is growing a little bit more. We heard about Bush's Beans growing a little bit more. Unfortunately, Goya is growing a little bit more. These brands are growing, and because of that, they do have jobs available. It's not perfect. I'm not saying it is, but sometimes it helps to look tangential and think about how you then spin that when ad agency jobs do open up. Because I spun the hell out of my finance job to try to get an advertising job, even though it had absolutely nothing to do with the job at all. But I was figuring out how to I presented an Excel spreadsheet to a client to have great relationships with my client. Like you just have to turn it into something else, which is true. It's not that it's not true. It's that you need to present yourself in a way that an advertising person is going to go, oh yeah, this person knows how to communicate. They know how to sell themselves. They're very good at that. And who cares if they had experience, hustling Bush's, like that's good. Take those, make some of the money, and then turn it into something in the future. Kind of think 2 or 3 steps ahead. Think about what chess piece you're playing with and how you're going to do that with yourself. Because, I know that advertising jobs right now are places of privilege, and we want to be able to help as best as we can, but you also need to help yourself as much as possible and hustle and get what you need.
Great. Stacy, I'll direct this at you, kind of changing the tact a little bit, talking about what it has been like working for the past 4.5, 5 months. In agency business, culture is such an important part of our business. What has it been like for you with the Carmichael Lynch team?
It's like anything. I think there's good and bad, right? I will say this, for a long time, I think advertising's been an industry that hasn't really embraced work from home. There's a little bit of this, like, who can work harder, who can work longer, who can stay at the office, who's going to pull the all-nighter. That's almost this sign of like your commitment. And I think we're revisiting all of that. What I will say is this, agencies and advertising are like ideas in space and people. We don't make or manufacture an actual thing. It's like these ideas. And individual work, I think people can do well remotely, right? But when it comes to creativity, I think that's where it gets hard, because creativity is not a linear thing. It's not like writing a deck or writing a contact report. It's formed from like what Droga refers to as like the collision of people. And every agency, at least in Minneapolis that I'm aware of, that's been remodeled in the last 5 years, has done so with being mindful of how to actually create moments of collision where people are running into each other in a greenhouse, going by each other on a staircase, because those are the moments where ideas get pulled apart and put back together again, and ideas are really shaped and formed. In addition to just the cultural things that make advertising as an industry such a destination for a lot of people. So I've found it's just, honestly, I don't have the answer to that. Maybe these guys do, but how do you create that? How do you duplicate and replicate that, for lack of a better word, collision of ideas and people remotely when we're behind these screens all day long? That's the challenge, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Andy, as our creative panel expert, Stacy brought up the great question: how do you make creativity happen in this Zoom world that we're living in?
It is very hard. I mean, the collision is super important. I mean, I long for the days when we can stand up against a board full of ideas again, and I'll poke at it with markers and Post-its and discuss and go back and tear things down and put things back up, and which is the creative process. And I mean, it's that there's rigor in that, and there's like showmanship, and you have to sell your idea, and you're talking to people all together, and then you have to defend it, and like all that stuff. Yes, it can happen via Zoom, but it just kind of isn't the same. So what I've seen, at least within Weber, is a lot of and it's how I guess I've always worked, is like you kind of go off by yourself first. You get some ideas cooking, so you don't show up empty-handed to the brainstorm, right? Because brainstorms are hard. So you show up with some preloaded ideas, but then begins the banter. And it's either like, you can still do it like this. It's kind of awkward. It's getting more normal. But it's hard it's easier to do one-on-one. So like with a partner, I'll look through the screen concept or think of ideas. But as soon as there would normally be a boss of some kind or another opinion that would roll in and have a little side opinion, that's when things get weird with the screen, because you're all staring at each other. There isn't like, I feel like body language is really important in all of this too. And it's hard. You can only see from my shoulders up right now. You have no idea how much I'm fidgeting with my hands or like bouncing my leg because I'm nervous or whatever. And all that counts when you're trying to sell something through, or when you're, if an idea is good, an idea is good, and it's going to rise up. But so much of it is the dance, I guess, that it's just harder.
Yeah. Nitin, how about you? I know we talk in account planning, collaboration, how important that is. What's it been like for you?
I mean, it's been hard. I've struggled with it quite a bit because, and my stupid self also moved halfway across the country during a pandemic. So I feel like I isolated myself even further, but yeah, I mean, it's been challenging because you do want to be able to collaborate with people. I mean, I have never, ever written a brief by myself, ever. It's always with 10 other people in a room and you're talking it out. And then really my job is to listen to everyone go, yeah, that's a good brief, and put it on a piece of paper. That's what I would say a strategist's job is most of the time. But what has happened is we sort of have to, I think, coming back from, I think Andy said this earlier, we have to think about the restrictions and the parameters we have and try to get really creative of how then we can get past those. So, you know, I will literally just Zoom call people out of the blue, or we'll just have a nice group chat with our agency and go, what are people watching that's been engaging them now? At our strategy team status, it's what's one thing that actually brings you joy now? Because a lot of it too is that momentum you get. Even if, whether you're an introvert and a lot of this is probably helping you, or if you're an extrovert, this is really hurting you. You have to find ways to kind of get that momentum, make yourself feel good, and bring as much as you can to the table, and then find ways to collaborate. You know, we had a UX question earlier. What's the UX of us collaborating better? I hope someone invents something just crazy better than Zoom, because Zoom is good, but it's not perfect. And I don't know what that looks like, but I encourage someone on this chat to find out. Because it would be immensely helpful. And yeah, I mean, I'm calling creative directors out of the blue, just saying, hey, I have a brief. I'm going to share my screen. I'm forcing you to look at it. Maybe I go a little bit further than I did in the past. I get the brief further. So it's a little bit less of, here's another 30 minutes of screen time on your face. Maybe it's 10 minutes of screen time on your face. And you know, presenting work has changed quite a bit, where, you know, I put on a collared shirt for this. I do it for my client presentations. I'm wearing basketball shorts, you know, waist down. You don't see that. So the body language has become here up. So I try to smile and laugh as much as I can too, because that does make a difference as much as you can, because we've said, I'm sure everyone here feels it, like relationships and partially enthusiasm are a big part of this, and your enthusiasms create even more enthusiasm. So the more like of your self that you can bring to this, the better it's going to be. But also, I want to acknowledge that some days are just sucky because everybody's in a bad situation right now. It's almost like we should stop asking, how are you? And just say, how sucky was today? Because how was it really? Because yes, this is a really tough situation, and we all need to empathize with each other as well.
Right.
Well, passion and enthusiasm, just to add on that, like, I think that's hard because we used to, you know, 3 months ago, we called it working from home. And let's be honest, it's really living from work. And those commute times, there were moments to kind of recharge, or the conversations about like watching Game of Thrones last night that like energized you. And that energy is what leads to like ideas and passion. And when some of that is stripped away, it's really hard. So we're, as an agency, trying to look at things like, you know, do we designate parts of days that are meeting free? How do we build in some of those cultural things remotely, just to try to manufacture some of that energy and that enthusiasm again? And also, frankly, just to put boundaries in place for an industry that's never been good on boundaries, right?
Absolutely. So speaking of boundaries, we are kind of right at the time, but we got one final question we want to hear from you as we wrap up. What is the one piece of advice you would give to agencies' clients about managing their brands for the rest of 2020? Andy, I'll start with you.
I don't know, rapid fire. Maybe don't be so thoughtful that you're paralyzed, but don't be so fast that you can mess it up. Like, you have to be careful, you know. Get it done. Don't spend the normal months of time toiling. Like, you need to move. If you want to capitalize on what's happening right now, because the only other option is just wait, and that's probably not okay either.
Stacy.
Just continue to stay true to your brand DNA and what you bring to it, instead of trying to be responsive to every little thing, which would cause a lot of just branding and messaging schizophrenia. Great.
Nitin?
In an ideal world, be on the right side of history. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Virtual applause for 3 great panelists. Thank you, Andy, Stacy, and Nitin. We appreciate your time today, sharing your insights on branding in 2020. I think we could have talked all afternoon, but we do have to be respectful of boundaries for people. So I want to thank everybody for attending, and look forward to more webinars from HSJMC. And again, let's thank Nitin, Andy, and Stacy for a great job today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.